A palace burns against the night sky, and an emperor vanishes without a trace. This is just one fragment of a past filled with silent questions. We are about to embark on a journey through the 30 greatest historical mysteries of ancient China. You will uncover secrets of unopened tombs guarded by clay armies, technologies so advanced they defy explanation, and entire civilizations that left only strange artifacts behind. By the end, you will possess a collection of stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about history. We will stand before a sealed burial mound rumored to contain rivers of liquid mercury and puzzle over a sunken city perfectly preserved in deep water. What is the most enduring mystery a civilization can leave behind? That vanished emperor was Qin Shi Huang, the man who first unified China. His final resting place remains one of history's most tantalizing and forbidden puzzles. The story begins not with archaeologists but with farmers. In the spring of 1974, several men in Shaanxi province were simply trying to dig a new well. Their shovels struck something hard, something that was not earth. They had uncovered the head and shoulders of a life-sized clay soldier staring blankly up through the soil. This accidental discovery revealed the now famous terracotta army, thousands of silent warriors standing in battle formation. But here is the crucial point everyone must understand. These soldiers are not the main event. They are merely the outer guard, the perimeter security for the true prize, the emperor's mausoleum itself, which lies under a vast, unexcavated mound about 1 mile away. Ancient historians wrote incredible accounts of what waits inside. They describe a miniature universe constructed underground, with ceilings inlaid with pearls to mimic the night sky, and flowing rivers and oceans crafted not from water but from liquid mercury. The texts warn of ingenious crossbow traps set to fire automatically at any intruder, and palaces filled with treasures beyond measure. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as legend, the fanciful exaggerations of poets. Then modern science intervened. Geochemical surveys of the tomb mound have repeatedly detected mercury concentrations in the soil that are dramatically, abnormally high. The readings match the descriptions of those mercury rivers perfectly. This means the ancient records were not myth, they were reporting facts, so we are left with a breathtaking dilemma. We likely know what is in there, and the evidence suggests the stories are true. The tomb is a sealed, toxic time capsule, potentially both mechanically and chemically booby-trapped. Do we possess the technology to enter it without destroying its contents or without risking catastrophe? What unimaginable artifacts, what lost writings, what final vision of a unified empire does the first emperor keep locked away? For now, the greatest mystery is not what is inside, but whether humanity will ever be brave enough or wise enough to open the door. That unopened tomb represents a mystery of preservation, a secret kept intact by choice and by poison. But what about a mystery of deliberate erasure, a culture that seems to have buried its own legacy before vanishing from the earth? In the spring of 1986, in a quiet rural area of Sichuan province known as Sanxingdui, archaeologists made a discovery that would shatter the conventional narrative of Chinese civilization. While excavating 2 large rectangular pits, their tools began to uncover objects that defied all understanding. They were not finding simple pottery or familiar ritual vessels. Instead, they pulled from the earth a collection of artifacts so bizarre, so stylistically audacious, they appeared to have arrived from another world. There were massive bronze masks with exaggerated tubular eyes protruding several inches from the face, some covered in delicate sheets of gold foil. There were life-sized bronze heads with angular, solemn features and enormous pointed ears. And then there was the centerpiece, a breathtaking bronze sacred tree standing over 13 feet tall, with birds perched on its branches and a coiled dragon winding down its trunk. This was not just an archaeological find, it was a confrontation with the utterly unknown. This civilization thrived along the banks of the Min River over 3,000 years ago, contemporary with the Shang dynasty to the north, yet it shared almost nothing with its neighbor. The people of Sanxingdui possessed staggering technological skill, mastering bronze casting on a monumental scale, yet they left behind no pyramids, no great palaces, and most puzzling of all, not a single scrap of writing. Their entire history is told through these silent, staring objects. Then, around 3,000 years ago, this vibrant culture simply ceased to exist. The ultimate mystery lies in those two pits. They were not graves, they were not storage cellars, they were ritual burial pits where the Sanxingdui people carefully, systematically laid their most sacred and magnificent treasures into the ground, smashed many of them, and then covered them with earth. Why would a civilization do that? Why would they ritually destroy and inter the very objects that defined their spiritual world? Was it an act of purification before a mass migration, a desperate offering to angry gods during some cataclysm, or was it a final, definitive act of closure, a way to bury their identity forever? We look into the hollow, gold-covered eyes of their statues and see a profound intelligence staring back, but they offer no answers, only a deeper, more haunting question. What story were they trying to end by burying it so completely? The silent enigma of Sanxingdui is a mystery born from absence, a culture that left no written word to explain its own end. But sometimes a mystery is born from a single, chaotic moment that rewrites history. In the early summer of 1402, the imperial capital of Nanjing was a city under siege. For 3 years, a brutal civil war known as the Jingnan Campaign had raged. On one side was the young Emperor Jianwen, who had ascended the Ming dynasty throne. On the other was his powerful, ambitious uncle, Zhu Dai, the Prince of Yan. Zhu Dai's formidable army finally breached the city walls, fighting their way toward the heart of imperial power, the Forbidden Palace. As his soldiers entered the complex, a tremendous fire suddenly erupted from the main halls. Flames and black smoke engulfed the buildings, creating a scene of utter chaos. When the fire finally died down, the search began for the emperor. Among the charred and unrecognizable remains, officials presented a corpse they claimed was Jianwen. But the identification was never conclusive. There was no definitive proof, no item of imperial regalia found with the body that could settle the matter. And so, from the ashes of that palace, a legend was born. The story spread that the young emperor had not perished. In a desperate bid for survival, he had shaved his head, disguised himself as a Buddhist monk, and slipped out of the burning capital through a secret tunnel. This was not just a fleeting rumor. For decades, even for the rest of his life, the new emperor, Zhu Dai, now reigning as the Yongle emperor, was haunted by the possibility that his nephew was still alive. There were alleged sightings across the empire, reports of a mysterious monk with imperial bearing. Eunuchs were sent on covert missions to track down leads. The famous Admiral Zheng He, on his epic voyages that reached as far as Africa, is speculated by some historians to have carried a secret secondary mission to search for the missing emperor in foreign lands. The disappearance of Jianwen was more than a personal family tragedy. It was a political earthquake. It created a permanent stain on Yongle's legitimacy, a whispered question that he could never fully silence. In response, he embarked on monumental projects to solidify his rule and perhaps to outshine the ghost of his nephew. He moved the capital north and built the magnificent Forbidden City in Beijing as a new, unquestionable seat of power. He commissioned the gargantuan Yongle Encyclopedia to compile all known knowledge. He sponsored Zheng He's treasure fleets to project Ming authority across the oceans. Every grand act can be seen as an attempt to bury that original mystery under an avalanche of glory. So we are left to wonder, did a clever young man truly orchestrate one of history's greatest escapes, living out his days in anonymous contemplation? Or did he die in that fire, his body lost while his story took on a life of its own? The truth vanished in the smoke, leaving behind a ghost that shaped the destiny of an empire. From the political fire of a palace, we journey now to the silent stone of a frontier. The Great Wall stretches across northern China like the backbone of history itself, a symbol of monolithic defense. But if you look closely at certain sections, particularly those rebuilt during the Ming dynasty near Beijing, you will notice something strange interrupting the familiar crenellations. Set into the solid stone of the wall's upper battlements are rows of neat, rectangular holes. They are not damage or erosion. They are clearly intentional, perfectly spaced, and utterly mysterious. Their purpose was never clearly recorded in the official histories, leaving us with a puzzle built into the very fabric of this iconic structure. One prominent theory is purely practical construction. The holes could have been sockets for wooden beams that supported scaffolding, allowing workers to build and repair the wall efficiently. Once the work was done, the beams were removed, leaving these empty sockets behind. Yet their placement on the finished top level of the wall, the very platform soldiers would patrol, makes this seem inconvenient, like leaving tripping hazards on a critical defensive walkway. This leads to a second, more compelling military theory. Perhaps these niches were mounting points for heavy defensive weapons. A large, wall-mounted crossbow, a device called a nu, could have been positioned here, its stock braced within the hole to absorb the powerful recoil. Later, as gunpowder weapons like early cannons emerged, the holes might have served as stable emplacements for these new, game-changing arms. The spacing could allow for a lethal field of overlapping fire against any assault. But there is a third, more enigmatic possibility. Could they have had a ritual or symbolic function? Some researchers note the regularity and care of their construction, suggesting they might have held banners, signal flags, or even ritual objects to bolster the morale of the guards stationed in these remote, windswept towers, a small gesture to mark their human presence against the vast landscape. When we compare them to other defensive architecture of the time, the military explanation feels most instinctive. Yet the complete absence of a written manual or decree specifying their use is in itself a profound clue. It suggests their function might have been so obvious to the soldiers and engineers of the Ming dynasty that it never needed to be written down, a piece of common knowledge lost to time. So we are left staring at these empty slots, trying to mentally fill them with beams, with weapons, or with flags. Each choice paints a different picture of life on the wall, one of relentless construction, of tense defense, or of lonely ceremony. Which version of the past feels most alive to you when you look at those silent, waiting holes? While the Great Wall stands as a monument of stone against the sky, another ancient wonder was preserved by a deliberate act of burial in water. Deep beneath the tranquil, island-dotted surface of Qingdao Lake in Zhejiang Province lies a silent metropolis. This is the sunken city of Shicheng, often called the Lion City, and it is not a ruin. It is a time capsule frozen in a moment from the 1950s and yet containing architecture centuries older. The story of its disappearance is modern, and its cause is not war or natural disaster but progress. In 1959, the Chinese government constructed the Xinan River Dam for a new hydroelectric station. The valley flooded, creating the massive artificial Qingdao Lake. Submerged beneath up to 40 meters of water were two ancient counties, including the remarkable Shicheng, which had foundations stretching back to the Han Dynasty over 2,000 years ago, with much of its visible architecture from the Ming and Qing periods. The water was cool, calm, and remarkably free of the biological activity and strong currents that normally erode sunken structures. It acted as a perfect preservative. For decades, the city was largely forgotten, a local legend lying in the deep. Then, in the early 2000s, underwater archaeologists began systematic surveys. Using advanced diving equipment and sonar mapping, they revealed a site that left them breathless. they found not crumbling foundations but an almost perfectly intact cityscape. Grand stone archways, some with their wooden beams still in place, stood defiantly on the lake floor. Entire streets lined with buildings remained recognizable. Exquisite carved details emerged from the stone, figures of lions, dragons, and phoenixes, their artistry sharp and clear despite the gentle aquatic algae that now adorned them. The most stunning images show immense, ornate memorial archways known as peifang, standing tall and completely whole, as if waiting for a procession that will never come. The central mystery here is not one of destruction but of sacrifice. Why was this specific, historically rich city chosen to be flooded? The practical answer is geography. It sat in the valley that would create the largest reservoir. Yet, knowing the cultural treasure that was being lost, the decision carries a profound weight. It represents a moment where the urgent needs of the modern world for electricity and water quietly eclipsed a link to the ancient past. Today, the mystery shifts from why it was flooded to what it still holds. The challenges of studying it are immense, requiring highly technical, expensive diving expeditions. We have stunning photographs of its grand civic structures, but what of the intimate spaces? What personal artifacts lie inside the submerged homes, untouched for generations? What forgotten stories are written on documents that may have survived in sealed chests? The water that hides Shicheng also protects it from looters and the wear of weather and tourism. It is, in a strange way, both lost and saved. We can see its grandeur, but its whispers are muffled by 40 meters of deep, still water. What would we learn about daily life in an imperial Chinese county if we could walk its silent, submerged streets? Water preserves the physical form of a city, but time often erases the very mechanics of genius. In the year 132, during the illustrious Han Dynasty, a court scholar and inventor named Zhang Heng presented the emperor with a device that seemed to defy the limits of his era. It was a large, ornate bronze urn about 6 feet in diameter. Encircling its body were 8 dragon heads, each facing a cardinal or intercardinal direction, north, northeast, east, and so on. Cradled in each dragon's jaw was a bronze ball. Positioned directly beneath each dragon, with mouths agape, sat 8 corresponding bronze toads. The device was beautiful, but its purpose was utterly revolutionary. Zhang Heng called it an earthquake weathercock. We know it today as the world's first seismoscope. Its claimed function was as precise as it was miraculous. When an earthquake occurred, even one too distant for people in the capital to feel, one of the 8 dragon heads would activate. Its jaw would open, and the bronze ball would clatter down into the waiting mouth of the toad below. The direction of the fallen ball would indicate the compass direction from which the seismic waves had originated. Historical records from the later Han court seem to corroborate its success. One account states that on a day when no tremor was felt in the capital, the dragon facing west released its ball. Several days later, a messenger arrived from a region far to the west reporting a major earthquake, confirming the device's warning. This story, whether perfectly accurate or not, cemented the seismoscope's legendary status, and then it vanished. The device itself was lost, likely melted down in some later period of turmoil. Most critically, the detailed records of its internal mechanism were lost with it. This is the core of the mystery. We know what it was supposed to do, and we have some faith that it did something remarkable, but we have no blueprint for how it worked. For centuries, the seismoscope existed as a tantalizing footnote, a symbol of ancient Chinese ingenuity. Then, in the modern era, scientists and historians began attempting to reverse engineer it. The leading theories focus on a clever use of basic physics. One prominent hypothesis suggests a heavy, inverted pendulum was suspended in the center of the urn. A distant quake would cause the pendulum to swing, striking a lever mechanism on the urn's inner wall that would trigger the corresponding dragon to release its ball. Another theory proposes a system of inertia where a central mass would stay still as the urn moved slightly, causing a linked arm to push a ball out of a delicate holder. Modern reconstructions based on these principles have shown some success in laboratory tests, able to indicate general direction under simulated conditions. Yet the nagging question remains, did Zhang Heng's original device work with the consistent accuracy the histories imply, or was it perhaps partly a brilliant piece of political theater? In an empire where the emperor's mandate was tied to harmony with heaven, a device that could sense the anger of the earth was a powerful tool demonstrating the court's cosmic awareness. The true mystery of the seismoscope, therefore, is twofold. It is a technical puzzle, a challenge to reconstruct a lost machine, but on a deeper level, it is a mystery about the nature of discovery itself. Was Zhang Heng a lone scientific pioneer whose mechanical secrets died with him, or was his invention a perfect fusion of engineering, statecraft, and symbolism, a machine whose true power lay as much in belief as in its bronze mechanisms? We are left listening for the echo of a bronze ball that fell 2,000 years ago, wondering what exactly it signaled. The echoes of ancient ingenuity often fade, leaving us with only descriptions. But sometimes the past delivers a mystery in breathtakingly intimate detail, a person preserved across millennia. In the winter of 1972, workers digging an air raid shelter near Changsha in Hunan province uncovered something that would rewrite the book on archaeological preservation. They had found the Sanxingdui tombs, the burial site of a high-ranking Han Dynasty official and his family. But it was the contents of one specific tomb, that of the Marquise of Dai, a noblewoman named Sanxingdui, that would send shockwaves through the scientific world. When archaeologists carefully opened the innermost of four nested, beautifully lacquered coffins, they were not met with a skeleton, they were met with a woman. Sanxingdui had died over 2,100 years ago, around 168 BC, yet her body was in a condition so pristine it defied all logic. Her skin was still supple and elastic to the touch, her limbs retained flexibility at the joints, her hair, including her eyelashes and brows, was intact and rooted in her scalp. Her internal organs were still in place, and forensic analysis even identified her blood type. It was as if she had passed away mere weeks, not centuries before. This was not a mummy in the traditional sense, a deliberately desiccated and wrapped body. This was a state of preservation so complete it bordered on suspended animation. The immediate and enduring mystery is how the tomb itself was a masterpiece of protective engineering. Buried deep underground, the body was encased within four progressively smaller coffins, each sealed with lacquer and clay, creating an airtight environment. The outermost chamber was packed with over 5 tons of moisture-absorbing charcoal and sealed beneath a thick layer of impermeable white clay. This created a stable, sterile, and oxygen-free tomb, halting the bacterial decay that normally begins moments after death. But the most puzzling element was the mysterious liquid in which Sanxingdui's body was immersed within the innermost coffin. It was a slightly acidic, brownish broth containing traces of mercury and other minerals. For decades, scientists have analyzed this fluid, trying to crack its preservative code. Was it a deliberate embalming solution, a recipe known only to Han Dynasty morticians and now lost? Or was it an accidental byproduct, a cocktail formed by the decomposition of the silk she was wrapped in, the lacquer of the coffins, and the groundwater, which just happened to have perfect antiseptic properties? The analyses have provided clues but no definitive answer. We know the environment was key, the triple defense of charcoal, clay, and airtight sealing. Yet the exact role of that enigmatic liquid remains hotly debated. It may have helped to slightly tan the skin or to create a hostile environment for microbes. The true formula, the specific steps taken by those ancient mortuary scientists, died with them. Sanxingdui, therefore, is more than a historical figure. She is a direct physical bridge to the Han Dynasty. Her preservation allows us to know what she ate for her last meal, the specific diseases that afflicted her, even the style of her cosmetics. But the very technology that saved her for science remains just out of our grasp. We can reconstruct her life from her body, but we cannot fully reconstruct the profound knowledge that kept her from turning to dust. She is the ultimate paradox, an open book written in flesh and blood, whose most important page, the instructions for her survival, is missing. Xinjui's body was saved by a perfect tomb, a secret sealed in clay and charcoal. But another secret from China's past was deliberately erased, not by nature, but by human hands, vanishing into the open sea of history. In the early 1400s, the Ming Dynasty launched the most formidable naval force the world would see for centuries. Commanded by the Muslim eunuch Admiral Zheng He, the treasure fleets were a spectacle of unimaginable scale. They were not just a few ships, they were floating cities of diplomacy and power. The largest vessels, the legendary treasure ships, are described in contemporary accounts as being over 400 feet long, with 9 masts and multiple decks. To put that in perspective, Christopher Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria, was roughly 80 feet long. Zheng He's fleet dwarfed it. These armadas carried not just soldiers and sailors, but diplomats, astronomers, doctors, and translators. They sailed from Southeast Asia across the Indian Ocean, reaching the coast of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and possibly beyond. They brought back giraffes for the imperial zoo, spices, gems, and envoys from dozens of kingdoms. For nearly 3 decades, these voyages projected Ming China's grandeur across half the world, and every journey was meticulously documented. Scribes on board kept daily logs, charted coastlines, recorded trade agreements, and described the customs, geography, and wildlife of every land they visited. These records were compiled into the official court annals, the Ming Shilu. They represented a complete atlas and encyclopedia of the early 15th century world, seen through Chinese eyes. Then they disappeared. Sometime after the voyages were abruptly halted in the 1430s, the detailed records of Zheng He's expeditions were systematically destroyed or locked away in secret archives to be forgotten. This was not an accident, it was a calculated act of historical whitewashing. The motive was a fierce political struggle within the Ming court. A powerful faction of Confucian scholar officials had always viewed the treasure fleets with deep suspicion. To them, these grand adventures were a colossal waste of imperial resources. They saw the voyages as projects of the eunuch class, their rivals who gained influence through them. The Confucians believed China's focus should be inward, on agricultural stability and defending the northern borders against nomadic threats, not on sailing to distant barbarian lands. When they finally gained the upper hand, they moved to erase this chapter. They purged the archives, burning or hiding the most detailed logs, maps, and ship specifications. They likely preserved only the barest outlines to acknowledge the voyages happened, but stripped them of their glory and their knowledge. So what exactly was lost? We lost the star charts and sailing directions that guided those massive ships across unknown waters. We lost the first-hand accounts of the Swahili coast cities, the detailed layouts of Indian ports, the descriptions of animals and plants that no European would document for another century. Most tantalizing of all, we lost the technical blueprints for building the treasure ships themselves. How did they construct a wooden vessel 400 feet long without it flexing and breaking apart in the open ocean? What was the exact rigging, the hull design, the compartmentalization that made them seaworthy? The answers sank with the records. The scale of this loss reshapes our understanding of global history. Imagine if those records had survived and circulated. Would European explorers, decades later, have sailed with Chinese charts in their hands? Would the age of exploration have unfolded differently? The deliberate destruction of the treasure fleet archives is a mystery of absence, a ghost in the historical record. It forces us to wonder how much of our world's interconnected story was known centuries earlier and then deliberately forgotten, leaving only the echo of a fleet that once ruled the waves. The vast oceans of Zhenghe's era were charted and then erased by political will, but some mysteries are etched into objects so small they fit in the palm of your hand. In the late 1980s, archaeologists excavating a Neolithic site called Jiahu in Henan province uncovered a collection of artifacts that would send a quiet tremor through the study of human communication. The site itself was astonishingly old, dating back nearly 9,000 years. Among the remains of this ancient village, they found carefully worked tortoise shells and bone artifacts, some of which bore a series of carefully incised markings. These were not random scratches or decorative patterns, they were deliberate composed symbols. To understand why this is so revolutionary, you must grasp the timeline. The earliest universally accepted Chinese writing is the oracle bone script of the Shang dynasty, which begins around 3,200 years ago. The Jiahu symbols are more than 5,000 years older. They predate the Shang by a span of time greater than the entire history of ancient Rome to the present day. This discovery forces a fundamental question. What exactly are we looking at? The academic debate is fierce and unresolved. One school of thought argues these are proto-writing. They could be clan emblems, ownership marks, or numerical tallies, a system of symbolic notation but not a full written language capable of recording complex speech. Another, more tantalizing theory suggests they are indeed a very early, rudimentary form of writing. When you place some of the Jiahu symbols side by side with later oracle bone characters, the resemblance is uncanny. A symbol that looks strikingly like an eye, for instance, appears at Jiahu and evolves into the oracle bone character for eye. A marking resembling a doorway or portal at Jiahu bears a clear lineage to the later character for door. These parallels are too specific to dismiss as mere coincidence. They suggest a cultural memory, a slow, millennia-long evolution of symbolic thought that eventually crystallized into the Chinese script we know. If this interpretation is correct, the implications are staggering. It would mean the roots of Chinese writing are twice as deep as previously believed, stretching back into the very dawn of settled agriculture in East Asia. But the mystery goes even further. If this is writing, what do the symbols say? What messages did these Neolithic farmers living 9,000 years ago want to communicate to the future? Were they recording a harvest, invoking a spirit, marking a grave, or telling a story of their world? Each tortoise shell is a locked box without a key. Modern decipherment efforts are painstaking, comparing the symbols to later scripts and to pictographs found on pottery from other Neolithic cultures, trying to find a Rosetta Stone that does not exist. The silence of these objects is profound. They represent a potential leap in human cognition, a moment when abstract thought was first given permanent form. Yet that thought remains just out of reach, a whisper from a time before pyramids, before cities, before history itself was written. We hold these carved shells knowing they contain meaning, and we cannot read a single word. What story is waiting, patiently etched in bone, for us to finally understand? The silent symbols of Jiahu represent a beginning, a first attempt to make meaning permanent. But 1,000 years ago, in a desert oasis, an entire library of meaning was deliberately hidden away, its existence forgotten for centuries. In the stark cliffs of the Mogao grottos near Dunhuang, a Taoist monk named Wang Yuanlu was attempting to restore a crumbling Buddhist cave temple in the year 1900. As he cleaned the sand from a long corridor, a section of plastered wall sounded hollow. Investigating further, he discovered a hidden door, bricked up and painted over to blend perfectly with the surrounding murals. Behind it was a small, square chamber, no larger than a modest room, packed from floor to ceiling with an unimaginable treasure. It was not gold or jewels. It was paper and silk. This was Cave 17, later known as the Library Cave. Inside, stacked in chaotic piles, were more than 50,000 manuscripts, scrolls, and bundles. There were exquisite silk paintings on banners, delicate embroideries, and early printed documents. The texts were in a bewildering array of languages: Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, Sogdian, and even Hebrew, covering every conceivable topic: Buddhist sutras, Taoist and Confucian classics, legal contracts, medical treatises, student exercises, loan agreements, and personal letters. This was not a curated imperial collection. It was a sprawling, organic archive of life along the Silk Road, sealed away around the 11th century. The immediate and profound mystery is, why was this chamber sealed? The leading theory points to a looming threat. In the early 1100s, the region faced invasion by the Tangut Xia kingdom. The monks of Mogao, facing the prospect of destruction, may have bricked up their most precious and irreplaceable texts to save them from pillage or desecration. They likely intended to return when the danger passed, but for reasons lost to time, they never did. The cave was forgotten, its entrance fading into the muralled wall. An alternative, more spiritual theory suggests this was a ritual burial. In Buddhist tradition, sacred texts that were worn out or copied with errors were not simply discarded, they were respectfully interred. This chamber may have been a geniza, a sacred storeroom for documents that contained the name of the Buddha or other holy words, requiring them to be retired with ceremony rather than destroyed. The truth may blend both, a practical act of protection performed with ritual solemnity. The tragedy of the library cave is what happened after its discovery. Wang Yuanlu, with little understanding of the collection's global significance and no support from the distant Qing government, began to sell off the manuscripts to fund his restoration work. Over the next decade, explorers and archaeologists from Britain, France, Japan, and Russia arrived, acquiring vast portions of the hoard for a pittance. These documents now reside in institutions from London to Paris to Tokyo. While this dispersal saved them from the neglect and political chaos that would engulf China, it also fractured a single, coherent archive across the world. The mystery today is no longer about why it was sealed, but about what we have lost by its scattering. Each fragment in a foreign museum is a piece of a shattered mosaic. A contract in London might detail the price of camels, while a personal letter in Paris mentions the same merchant's family. Reuniting them digitally is a monumental task. The library offers a street-level view of the Silk Road, a cacophony of faiths, trades, and tongues. But its physical dismemberment means we may never fully hear the complete conversation. What undiscovered connections lie between those separated pages, waiting for us to piece the ancient world back together? A library of paper and silk preserved the voices of the Silk Road, but centuries earlier, a civilization spoke through a far more permanent and imposing medium. The Shang dynasty emerged from the mists of legend into history around 1600 BCE, and with them came a sudden, breathtaking explosion of artistic and technological genius cast in bronze. The mystery is not simply that they worked metal, but the sheer, inexplicable perfection of it all. In the span of what seems like a mere heartbeat in archaeological time, Shang metalworkers were producing objects of staggering complexity, size, and beauty that would not be rivaled for 1,000 years. How did this happen almost overnight? The answer lies in a revolutionary technique they perfected, known as piece mold casting. Unlike the lost wax method used in other ancient cultures, where a wax model is melted away, the Shang approach was modular and precise. Artisans would first create a clay model of the desired vessel, complete with every intricate design carved into its surface. This model was then used to press sections of clay around it, creating a series of interlocking negative molds. These molds were carefully fired into ceramic, reassembled around a solid clay core, and the molten bronze was poured into the gap between the core and the molds. Once cooled, the ceramic pieces were broken away, revealing a single, seamless bronze masterpiece. This technique allowed for razor-sharp, incredibly detailed decoration. The most iconic of these designs is the Taoti, a mysterious, symmetrical mask motif often featuring glaring eyes, horns, and abstract animal features. It is neither fully beast nor demon, but a powerful, abstract guardian face that seems to stare from another world. The level of control this method provided is why Shang bronzes, like the majestic square Ding cauldrons, have such crisp, profound relief work that feels alive even after 3 millennia. Yet the sophistication of the casting only deepens the core puzzle. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. The central plains, the Shang heartland, have no significant natural deposits of either ore. So where did the raw materials come from? The nearest major sources of copper and tin were hundreds of miles away, in the mountainous regions to the south and southwest. This implies the existence of vast, organized trade networks or even long-distance mining expeditions, operations that required a level of logistical control the early Shang state was not thought to possess. This material mystery fuels the debate over the origins of the technology itself. Did the Shang develop this unparalleled system entirely on their own through a burst of isolated genius? Or was there a technological transfer from earlier, neighboring cultures who were experimenting with metal? To the west, the Qijia culture shows evidence of simpler bronze work slightly before the Shang's rise. Could knowledge have filtered eastward and been radically refined? More controversial theories even suggest influences from much further afield, perhaps from the steppe cultures to the north, though the unique piece mold method is distinctly Chinese and has no clear parallel elsewhere. The technology appears almost fully formed because in the archaeological record it essentially is. We lack the long, slow trail of clumsy prototypes. We see the masterpieces. This suggests 2 possibilities. Either the earlier, experimental stages took place in a region not yet discovered, or the Shang refined an existing idea with such speed and purpose that they left the clumsy steps behind in a blur. That purpose was not merely artistic. These vessels were the physical anchors of state power and spiritual belief. They were not for daily use. They were ritual instruments used in solemn ceremonies of ancestor worship and state sacrifice. Inscriptions cast into some of them speak of honoring the royal ancestors, of recording military victories, of legitimizing the king's mandate to rule. The bronze itself, gleaned from distant lands and transformed through secretive, elite-controlled technology, was a symbol of the dynasty's reach and divine connection. To own and use these objects was to mediate between heaven and earth, so the mystery of Shang bronze is layered. It is a question of geology. Where did the metal come from? It is a question of invention. Was it borrowed or born there? And ultimately, it is a question of meaning. The sudden perfection of the form suggests a society that did not just want to make containers, but needed to forge the very vessels of its identity, to cast its authority in something that could withstand the corrosion of time. In their silent, imposing beauty, the bronzes succeeded, leaving us to wonder at the urgent, driven genius that conjured them from earth and fire. The bronze cauldrons of the Shang were forged to be seen, to project power and piety for eternity. But for another conqueror, the greatest power lay in vanishing completely. In August of 1227, the architect of the largest contiguous land empire in history, Genghis Khan, died. The exact cause remains debated, from injuries sustained in a fall from his horse to illness, but the aftermath of his death is where history dissolves into legend. According to accounts written by chroniclers like the Persian historian Rashid al-Din, a solemn funeral procession carried the Khan's body back toward his homeland. To ensure the tomb's location would never be found, the soldiers accompanying the cortege enacted a terrifying protocol. It is said they killed every person they encountered along the route, a sweeping curtain of silence. Then, once the body was interred in a secret location, the soldiers who had performed the burial were themselves executed by a separate detachment of warriors. Finally, that final detachment was also killed. It was a chain of secrecy sealed in blood, leaving no living witness. this extreme measure was rooted in a profound Mongol tradition. Unlike the Chinese emperors who built monumental tombs, Mongol leaders, especially in this early period, sought unmarked graves. After burial, the earth was carefully replaced, and 1,000 horses were driven back and forth over the site until the ground was utterly trampled and indistinguishable from the surrounding steppe. Sometimes a river was even diverted to flow over the grave, forever washing away its trace. For Genghis Khan, the chosen area was almost certainly the Burkhan-Koldun mountain range in north-central Mongolia, a place he had revered since his youth as a sacred sanctuary. This leads to the modern quest, a high-tech hunt for a ghost. For decades, expeditions have scoured the Burkhan-Koldun region, employing satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and even drones. In 2001, a much-publicized joint American-Mongolian venture claimed to have found a promising walled site, but it was later deemed a Mongol-era settlement, not the tomb. A Japanese team used satellite photos to identify potential locations, only to be blocked by Mongolian authorities. The search is fraught with political and spiritual sensitivity. Many Mongolians view the quest as a profound desecration, believing the Khan's rest should remain eternal and undisturbed. This reverence points to the core reasons for the secrecy, which go far beyond practical grave robbery. Spiritually, the Mongols believed the soul moved on and the body was part of the earth. A marked grave could trap the spirit or attract malign forces. Practically, an unmarked grave was the ultimate defense against enemies who might seek to desecrate the remains of the man who had conquered them. But perhaps most powerfully, the mystery itself became part of Genghis Khan's legacy. By disappearing into the land he loved, he achieved a form of immortality, becoming one with the endless Mongolian sky and steppe. His power was no longer located in a tomb, but in the very spirit of the nation. So what might lie frozen in that permafrost if it is ever found? The possibilities ignite the imagination. It is unlikely to be a trove of gold, as the Mongols were not known for burying vast material wealth. But we might find artifacts of immense historical significance, his personal effects, weapons, perhaps even records on birch bark or silk that could offer an unfiltered account of the empire's rise. There is even scientific speculation that the permafrost could have preserved organic remains to an extraordinary degree. Yet, the greatest discovery would be the confirmation of a truth that has lived only in story for 8 centuries. To find the tomb would be to solve the ultimate puzzle, but it would also end the mystery that has guarded his legend. The silence he commanded may be his most enduring victory. The absolute secrecy of a conqueror's grave stands in stark contrast to a mystery that was meant to be seen, held in the hand, and carried into battle. In museum cases across the world lie some of the most beautiful and lethal objects ever created: bronze swords from the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. Their blades are sleek and deadly, but it is their hilts and guards that captivate the eye. They are inlaid with intricate patterns of gold and silver, swirling designs of clouds and mythical beasts. And running along the blade itself, often inlaid with precious metals, are lines of text, but this is no ordinary writing. The characters are elongated, twisted, and transformed. They become birds in flight, coiled serpents, and stylized creatures. This is the enigmatic bird-worm seal script, often simply called bird script. It is a form of writing where art and language fuse into a single, mesmerizing code. You can sense the meaning is there, hiding in plain sight, yet it slips away just as you try to grasp it. Scholars can decipher some of the characters. They identify names, perhaps of a proud nobleman who commissioned the sword, or of a master smith whose reputation was legendary. They find words like eternal use or victory. But the full inscriptions rarely form complete, grammatical sentences we can easily understand. This gap between recognition and comprehension is the heart of the mystery. What was the true purpose of this exquisite, costly effort? One compelling theory is ownership and prestige. In an age of constant warfare and shifting alliances, a sword was more than a weapon, it was a symbol of rank and identity. Inlaying your name in gold and silver bird script onto a blade was the ultimate statement of aristocratic power, a permanent brand of possession. Yet, the sheer artistic complexity suggests something more than a simple name tag. This leads to a second, more mystical idea. Could these inscriptions be incantations? The transformation of characters into animal forms, especially birds often associated with messengers to the spirit world, might indicate a magical intent. Perhaps the script was meant to invoke speed like a bird, strength like a tiger, or the protective power of a dragon, binding that essence to the metal itself. The sword would then be both a physical weapon and a talisman, its edge guided by supernatural force. A third possibility is heraldic. The stylized animals could represent clan totems, a visual genealogy declaring the warrior's lineage and the divine or heroic origins of his family right there on the instrument of his duty. And we cannot dismiss pure artistry. In a time of incredible cultural flourishing, the sword was a canvas. The bird script could be the pinnacle of a craftsman's pride, a demonstration that his skill encompassed metallurgy, calligraphy, and design, creating an object of such beauty that its function was elevated to ceremony. The truth likely lies in the blend of all these purposes. To hold such a sword was to feel the weight of identity, the whisper of magic, the pride of ancestry, and the awe of art, all bound together in cold bronze and warm gold. The script was not meant to be quickly read in the heat of battle. It was meant to be contemplated, to tell a story that was personal, spiritual, and profound. When we look at these swords today, we see more than ancient weapons. We see portable monuments. The bird script is the voice of the sword itself, a language of power and beauty that we can still see but can no longer fully hear. High on a sheer limestone cliff face in Sichuan, suspended between earth and sky, rests a silent community of the dead. These are the hanging coffins of the Bo people, one of the most visually arresting and logistically baffling burial traditions in human history. You look up and see them, wooden coffins aged to the color of stone, perched on natural ledges, wedged into narrow caves, or balanced on wooden stakes driven directly into the rock. They cling to vertical walls, some positioned over 300 feet above the river valleys below. This was not an act of concealment, but one of spectacular, deliberate display. The Bo people, an ethnic group distinct from the Han Chinese, practiced this sky burial for centuries, perhaps even millennia. Their name, Bo, itself means crane, a bird that nests in high, inaccessible places, a fitting symbol for their final journey. Then, in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, this entire culture vanished from the historical record, leaving behind only these silent sentinels on the cliffs and a cascade of unanswered questions. The first mystery is one of pure physics. How did they do it? The coffins, often carved from single hollowed-out logs of nanmu, a dense, durable hardwood, could weigh over 1,000 pounds, especially when holding the remains of multiple family members. The cliffs they adorn are frequently sheer, smooth, and devoid of easy climbing paths. One prevailing theory involves a system of ropes and pulleys. Workers might have been lowered from the top of the cliff, or perhaps scaffoldings of bamboo and wood were constructed from the valley floor, a terrifyingly precarious undertaking. Another hypothesis suggests that during seasonal floods, the river water would rise, allowing boats to carry the coffins much closer to the cave openings, reducing the height they needed to be lifted. Yet even with higher water, the final maneuver of securing a heavy coffin onto a narrow ledge or onto wooden stakes would have required incredible strength, coordination, and courage. Each coffin placement was a monumental communal effort, a final, physical testament to the importance of the ritual, and that importance points to the spiritual mystery. Why go to such extreme lengths? The Bo people's beliefs, lost with them, can only be inferred. Placing the dead in the sky brought them closer to the heavens, to the realm of ancestors and deities, freeing their spirits from the mundane earth. Practically, it offered protection from scavenging animals, from flooding, and from desecration by enemies. It was also a permanent public monument to the deceased and their lineage, a statement that their presence would forever watch over the living from a sacred height. This makes their sudden disappearance in the Ming dynasty all the more haunting. Historical records are sparse but suggest a brutal suppression by imperial forces, a campaign of assimilation and conflict that may have scattered or eradicated the Bo. Did they fall victim to war, to forced migration, to disease? Were the last of their coffin bearers lowered from those cliffs, leaving no one to tend to the ritual or to remember its meaning? Today, the few remaining hanging coffins are protected relics, slowly succumbing to time and the elements. They are a museum without a guidebook, a sacred text written in wood and placed beyond reach. We can marvel at the engineering, we can guess at the faith, but the voices of the people who felt this was the only way to say goodbye are carried away on the same wind that whispers through those high, lonely caves. What profound love or fear or hope compels a society to lift its loved ones into the sky, only to then vanish from the face of the earth, leaving those elevated graves as their only epitaph? The Bo people lifted their dead beyond the reach of the living, but another vanished fortune was carried away by the living themselves, fleeing into the vast open steppe. When the Ming army stormed the Yuan dynasty capital of Dodu in 1368, they expected to seize the accumulated wealth of the Mongol Empire. This was not just a royal treasury, it was the legacy of Kublai Khan, who had ruled from a palace of such splendor it dazzled the Venetian merchant Marco Polo. The Yuan court had amassed unimaginable riches, gold and silver from across Asia, exquisite jades from cotton, pearls from the southern seas, silks woven with gold thread, and priceless artworks gathered from a realm stretching from Korea to Hungary. Yet when the Ming soldiers entered the heart of the empire, they found vaults conspicuously depleted. The last Yuan emperor, Toghon Temür, had executed a strategic retreat. He fled north toward the Mongolian homeland, and historical accounts are clear. He took a staggering portion of the imperial treasure with him. This was not a panicked flight, but a calculated exodus, moving the very soul of the dynasty's power onto ox carts and horseback. And then the trail goes cold. The treasure and the emperor vanished into the endless grasslands. What became of that colossal hoard? One possibility is pragmatic dispersal. The treasure may have been steadily spent over the following decades to fund the continuing resistance against the Ming, paying soldiers, buying alliances among the Mongol tribes, and sustaining the court in exile until its resources simply bled away into the soil of 100 battles. Yet the legend of a hidden cache persists, fueled by the sheer scale of what was moved. Could a significant portion have been buried for safekeeping, a war chest meant to finance a future reconquest that never came to pass? The Mongolian steppe is a landscape of subtle folds and hidden valleys, an ocean of grass where a secret could be kept forever. Modern searches have been sporadic, driven more by local folklore than systematic archaeology. There are tales among herders of forbidden valleys and strange mounds, but the sheer vastness of the territory makes the hunt for a specific, unmarked site nearly impossible. The treasure, if it still exists, would not be in a grand tomb like those of Chinese emperors, but in an unadorned pit, a place chosen for its forgettability. This mystery is more than a quest for gold. It represents the ghost of an empire's ambition. The treasure was the liquid capital of the Pax Mongolica, the glue that held a world system together. Its disappearance symbolizes the sudden evaporation of that unified world order, its wealth scattering like seeds on the wind, perhaps buried, perhaps spent, but ultimately dissolving back into the land from which the Mongol Empire first sprang. To find it would be to touch the final, tangible remnant of Kublai Khan's dream, a dream that retreated into the steppe and turned to silence. Scattered across the desolate plains of the Gobi, a silent stone calendar marks the passage of millennia. Far from the fertile river valleys where China's great dynasties rose, the desert holds its own ancient secret, a sprawling collection of megalithic structures that have baffled explorers for decades. At a remote site known locally as White Stone Mountain, you will find not one but dozens of mysterious formations. There are circles of upright stones, some knee-high, others towering over a person, arranged with deliberate intent. There are linear rows stretching toward the horizon, and complex patterns that from above resemble crude, weathered versions of Stonehenge. These are not the works of a settled, agricultural people who could dedicate generations to a single monument. They are the artifacts of mobility and endurance built in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Their age is itself a profound question. While precise dating is extraordinarily difficult in this context, researchers using comparative analysis and the scant archaeological evidence suggest these stones were raised between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago, placing their construction in the Neolithic period, a time when human societies were just beginning to grasp the rhythms of the natural world. The sheer physical effort involved is staggering, each stone likely dragged or carried across vast distances and then planted firmly into the hard desert earth. But the true mystery emerges when you stand within one of these circles at dawn on a specific day. Several independent studies, often led by adventurous archaeologists and astronomers, have proposed that key formations possess precise astronomical alignments. Certain stones seem to frame the rising sun on the summer solstice, while others point to significant stars or the winter solstice sunrise. If correct, this transforms the site from a random collection of rocks into a sophisticated celestial observatory, a stone computer built to track the year's cycle. This possibility ignites a fierce debate. Who are the architects of this desert sky watcher? The most plausible candidates are the early nomadic pastoralists who roamed the region. For herders, knowing the precise timing of solstices and equinoxes was not abstract science. It was survival, dictating the vital migration routes for their animals. The stones could have served as a communal calendar, a place where tribes gathered to confirm the turning of the seasons through direct observation. Another theory points to later travelers on the Silk Road who might have built these as waymarkers or ritual sites. Yet the antiquity of the structures argues against this, suggesting a much older, indigenous tradition. Could it have been a lost civilization, a culture that flourished in the go-by when it was perhaps less arid, leaving only these stone sentinels as proof of their cosmic curiosity? The environment itself guards the answers. The go-by's extreme temperatures, scouring winds, and vast emptiness make sustained archaeological study a monumental challenge. There are no accompanying tombs filled with artifacts, no nearby settlements to provide context. The stones themselves, eroded by countless sandstorms, offer no inscriptions, no carvings, only their steadfast positions. What they reveal, however, is a profound and universal human impulse. They tell us that long before written records, people in this harsh land looked up at the same stars we see today and felt a deep need to understand their patterns, to anchor their lives to the reliable clockwork of the heavens. They transformed the featureless desert into a map of the cosmos, using the most permanent material they could find. Each aligned stone is a frozen moment of observation, a testament to a prehistoric mind that saw order in the sky and sought to mirror it on the ground. The silent stones of the go-by mapped the heavens, but the greatest emperor of the Qin dynasty may have tried to erase a woman from his own personal cosmos. While the terracotta army stands guard for eternity, the historical record surrounding Qin Shi Huang is conspicuously silent on one intimate front: the women in his life. No official chronicle names an empress, no grand tomb for a queen is mentioned beside his own. For over 2,000 years, the private world of the man who unified China remained a fortress of solitude. Then, in the early 2000s, archaeologists made a discovery just over a mile from the emperor's own burial mound. They uncovered a second, separate tomb complex of astonishing scale and luxury. This was not a minor burial. The main tomb mound is immense, surrounded by a vast network of accompanying pits containing chariots, pottery, and the remains of real horses, a sign of the highest possible status. The artifacts recovered, though not yet fully excavated from the central chamber, speak of profound wealth and privilege. This was someone who held immense importance in the Qin court, someone whose final resting place was designed to mirror imperial grandeur itself. The logical conclusion points to a consort of the highest rank, perhaps even the mother of his heir, the future second emperor, Hu Hai. Yet her name is absent from the stone and bamboo records that survived the dynasty's collapse. This creates a mystery of deliberate omission. Who was she, and why was her memory seemingly scrubbed from the official narrative? The politics of succession offer a grim clue. After Qin Shi Huang's death, a brutal power struggle erupted. The chief eunuch Zhao Gao and the prime minister Lai Si conspired to forge an edict forcing the rightful heir to commit suicide and installing the younger, more pliable Hu Hai as emperor. To consolidate this usurpation, a bloody purge followed, eliminating potential rivals and those loyal to the previous order. If this tomb belongs to Hu Hai's mother, her legacy may have been a casualty of this very turmoil. Perhaps her association with the disgraced heir made her a dangerous figure to commemorate, or in the chaotic rewriting of history that followed the Qin's rapid fall, her story was simply lost, deemed unimportant by the historians of the victorious Han dynasty who wrote the accounts we rely on today. The scale of her tomb tells us she was unforgettable in life, yet the silence tells us she was made forgettable in death. This hidden complex is more than a grave, it is a ghost in the historical record, a testament to the hidden power dynamics and personal tragedies that swirl just beneath the surface of imperial unity. What influence did she wield? What role did she play in the shadowy corridors of the Qin court? The earth holds her name, but for now, the history books do not. Buried alongside King Zhaomo was a pair of jade objects that defy simple classification. In the tomb of this 2nd century BCE ruler of the Nanyu Kingdom, located in modern-day Guangzhou, archaeologists discovered 2 exquisite discs. One was carved with a pattern of sharp, straight lines radiating outward from a central point, a clear depiction of the sun. The other bore a graceful, curling pattern resembling a crescent moon. At first glance, they might be mistaken for the classic Chinese by discs, smooth jade circles with a central hole that symbolized heaven, but these were different. The patterns transformed them. They were not generic symbols of the sky, but precise, paired emblems of the 2 great celestial bodies. Their uniqueness poses a fascinating riddle. What was their true purpose in the court of a southern king? One possibility is profoundly practical. They could have been sophisticated astronomical instruments. The radiating lines on the sun disk might have served as a primitive gnomon, a sundial of sorts, where the shadows cast between the lines could mark specific times or even solstice points. Paired with the moon disk, perhaps used in nocturnal rituals, they could represent a complete, portable timekeeping system for a priestly class. Yet their placement in a royal tomb suggests a function far more sacred than mere timekeeping. This leads to a second, more compelling interpretation. They were ritual objects, direct conduits for communication with celestial powers. In this view, the king or his shamans would use these discs in ceremonies to draw upon the energy of the sun and moon, to ensure harmony between the earthly kingdom and the cosmic order. The jade itself, believed by ancient Chinese cultures to possess spiritual purity and durability, made it the perfect material to house such power. There is also a potent political reading. The Nanyu Kingdom was a fascinating cultural hybrid, a fusion of the indigenous Yu peoples of the south and the encroaching, sophisticated Han Chinese culture from the north. King Zhaomo himself was of mixed heritage, and his kingdom walked a delicate line between asserting its local identity and adopting Han customs to legitimize its rule. The paired sun and moon discs could symbolize this very duality, the sun representing the bright, structured yang influence of Han civilization, and the moon representing the older, more mystical yin traditions of the Yu lands. The king, by possessing both, claimed authority over both worlds, a unifier of cosmic and cultural forces. Of course, they might also have been breathtaking decorative pieces, royal insignia sewn onto robes or displayed as symbols of status. But their deliberate pairing and specific iconography feel too intentional for mere adornment. They seem to speak a language, a lost cosmological system where the sun and moon were not distant lights, but active, personified forces with which a ruler could treat. The tragedy is that the Nanyu Kingdom's distinct world, Yu, was eventually absorbed and overwritten by the expanding Han Empire. These two jade discs, therefore, are more than artifacts. They are fragments of a forgotten dialogue between earth and sky, and between the south and the north. They offer a silent, beautiful glimpse into how a unique kingdom at the crossroads of cultures saw its place in the universe, a perspective that vanished, leaving only these polished stones to hint at its celestial ambitions. While jade discs captured the silent dance of celestial bodies, the Tang dynasty court celebrated with a spectacle of roaring, living fire. Official records and the poems of dazzled observers describe a pyrotechnic marvel called the Fire Dragon, a display that went far beyond simple bursts of light in the sky. These were complex, seemingly self-propelled devices that performed with a terrifying, animate intelligence. They did not just explode, they moved. Accounts tell of fiery serpents that could race across the surfaces of palace ponds, twisting and skimming over the water for hundreds of feet before expiring in a shower of sparks. Others describe constructions that, once lit, would launch into the air and snake through the night, leaving trails of smoke and flame as they maneuvered before the astonished crowd. This was not mere celebration, it was a demonstration of a technology bordering on magic. The core mystery lies in the mechanism. The Tang dynasty was the golden age of early gunpowder experimentation, with alchemists and military engineers mixing saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal into potent compounds. The most plausible explanation is that the fire dragons were sophisticated early rockets. Artisans could have packed gunpowder into long, flexible bamboo tubes, sealed at one end and left open at the other. When ignited, the rapid expulsion of gases from the open end would create thrust, propelling the tube forward. By carefully shaping the bamboo or attaching guiding fins, and by packing the gunpowder in a specific sequence to burn in stages, they might achieve that sustained, serpentine motion. But the descriptions suggest even more complexity. Poets wrote of dragons that changed color, breathing green or purple smoke. This hints at a breathtaking knowledge of chemical additives. By incorporating compounds of copper or strontium into the fuel mix, these ancient pyrotechnicians could have produced colored flames and smoke, transforming the projectile into a chromatic marvel. Some accounts even suggest the dragons emitted thunderous roars, possibly achieved by incorporating pockets of powder that would explode sequentially along the tube's length. So what happened to this astonishing art? The silence that followed is as puzzling as the technology itself. One possibility is that the knowledge was a tightly guarded secret of the imperial workshops, a state secret so precious it was never widely disseminated and died with the master artisans who served a particular emperor. Another, darker theory is that it was deliberately suppressed. Such devices, after all, were not just entertainment, they were potential weapons. A ruling class wary of rebellion might have chosen to restrict and eventually erase the technical blueprints for self-propelled fire, ensuring such power remained solely in the hands of the state until even the state forgot how to wield it. Or perhaps the historical accounts contain a degree of poetic exaggeration, the awe of the witnesses inflating a brilliant but simpler firework into a legend of a living dragon. Yet the consistency and technical detail in these records argue against pure myth. They point instead to a fleeting peak of ancient chemical engineering, a moment when art, science, and spectacle converged to create something truly wondrous. The fire dragon did not just light up the Tang night sky, it represented a path not taken, a branch of technological evolution that glowed brilliantly and then, like its namesake, vanished into the smoke of history. The roaring fire dragons of the Tang court celebrated a dynasty's glory, but the ultimate symbol of that glory was a small, silent object of jade. For over 1,000 years, the single most important artifact in all of Chinese statecraft was not a sword or a crown, but a seal. This was the heirloom seal of the realm, also called the imperial seal, and its story is the story of the mandate of heaven made physical. Its legend begins with a piece of jade of almost mythical origin, the heshubai, a stone discovered in the state of Chu and later acquired by the first emperor Qin Shi Huang. After unifying China, he commanded that this priceless jade be carved into his imperial seal, inscribed with the phrase, "Having received the mandate from heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life." From that moment, possession of this seal was not just a political act, it was a cosmic one. To hold it was to hold the divine right to rule all under heaven. The seal's journey through history is a map of China's turbulent dynastic cycles. It passed from the fallen Qin to the victorious Han, a tangible trophy that legitimized the new emperor. For centuries, it was the ultimate prize, the proof that heaven's favor had shifted. Warlords and generals fought for it, empires rose and fell clutching it. It survived palace fires and bloody coups, becoming more than an object. It was the beating heart of imperial legitimacy. Then, in the chaotic 10th century, during the fragmented period known as the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, the seal vanished. The last reliable historical mention places it in the hands of the later Tang dynasty. After their collapse in 936, the trail goes cold. In the confusion of war and regime change, the heirloom seal of the realm simply disappeared. Its absence created a crisis of symbolism that never truly healed. Later dynasties, from the Song to the Ming and Qing, were forced to rule without it. They created new seals, but these were always replacements, copies trying to fill a void. The original was irreplaceable. This longing gave birth to a cottage industry of forgeries and hopeful myths. Throughout history, claims of its rediscovery would surface. A farmer would unearth a piece of old jade, a scholar would present a curious artifact to the court, but none ever withstood scrutiny. The seal carried a specific, documented weight and inscription, a pedigree that could not be faked. Each false alarm only deepened the mystery, proving how desperately the symbol was still needed. So what was its ultimate fate? The possibilities are few, but each carries profound weight. Was it destroyed, perhaps smashed in the heat of a sacked palace or lost in a fire, its jade fragments scattered and forgotten? Was it hidden by a loyal minister of the last dynasty to possess it, buried in a secret location whose knowledge died with him, waiting still in some unmarked grave? Or was it stolen, taken as plunder by a nomadic conqueror who did not understand its sacred significance, eventually lost or melted down far from the central plains? The most haunting possibility is that it still exists unrecognized, sitting in a private collection or gathering dust on a shelf. Its world-altering meaning faded to just an old piece of carved stone. Its disappearance did more than rob emperors of a trophy. It severed a direct physical line that stretched back to the very first emperor. It left a hole in the center of imperial power, a silence where the stamp of heaven's will should have been. The quest for the heirloom seal became, in itself, a testament to its power. For centuries, rulers who never touched it still had to answer the question of its absence, governing in the shadow of a missing seal that continued to legitimize or undermine them from beyond history's grasp. The heirloom seal's absence left a symbolic void, but the Song dynasty faced a crisis of a far more tangible kind, a desperate shortage of the very substance that made its economy tick: copper. In the 11th century, the Song government responded with a plan of breathtaking ambition, creating a strategic reserve of copper coins so vast it defies the medieval imagination. Official records speak of a stockpile amounting to billions upon billions of coins. To visualize this, picture not a single vault, but a network of fortified treasuries across the empire, each filled to the rafters with strings of standard-issue cash. This was not mere savings, it was a macroeconomic weapon, a buffer against inflation and market panic, intended to be released to stabilize prices and pay soldiers in times of crisis. The scale is staggering, representing what would have been one of the largest concentrated metal stockpiles on the planet at the time. And then, this mountain of metal simply vanished from history. The mystery of the giant copper reserve is a puzzle of logistics and statecraft on a colossal scale. What could have happened to billions of coins? The most straightforward answer is also the most tragic: it was spent. The late Song period was a relentless fight for survival against the Jurchen Jin dynasty to the north and later the Mongol onslaught. Financing these wars would have drained the treasury at an unprecedented rate. The coins would have been paid to armies, used to buy alliances, and to fund the construction of fortifications and warships. They flowed out of the state coffers and into the economy, or into the hands of enemies until the reserve was exhausted. Another possibility is transformation. In times of severe metal shortage, the government or local authorities might have ordered the coins melted down to cast tools, weapons, or ritual objects, their monetary value sacrificed for practical or spiritual necessity. Yet the complete absence of a historical paper trail detailing the reserve's dissolution is peculiar for such a meticulous bureaucracy. This silence fuels a more tantalizing idea: could a portion of it have been hidden? Facing imminent conquest, Song loyalists might have undertaken a desperate operation to bury vast quantities of coin to keep them from falling into Mongol hands, intending to recover them later to fund a resistance that never materialized. The archaeological evidence, however, is frustratingly silent. While Song-era coin hoards are discovered regularly, they are typically in the hundreds or thousands of coins, not the billions that would signal a central repository. No archaeological site has ever been identified as one of the legendary main treasury complexes. This suggests the coins met a diffuse fate, scattered and spent across a vast landscape of war and economic collapse. The giant copper reserve, therefore, is a ghost of a sophisticated economic mind. It represents a brilliant policy solution that was ultimately overwhelmed by the brutal physics of invasion and survival. Its disappearance marks the moment when abstract economic theory collided with the unyielding reality of siege warfare and conquest. We are left to wonder if, somewhere beneath the soil of modern China, a forgotten vault still lies packed with the carefully strung wealth of a dynasty that dreamed of stabilizing an empire, only to be swept away by the tides of history. In the silence of a modern village, the earth itself held a secret of staggering scale. In 1992, farmers in Longyu County, Zhejiang Province, were draining a local pond, expecting to find a small, muddy bottom. Instead, their pumps revealed something impossible: a smooth, artificial wall of stone descending into the darkness. This was not a natural formation. It was the entrance to one of 24 immense hand-carved caverns that had lain hidden for millennia. The Longyu Caves are a monument to anonymous labor that defies belief. Each cavern is a colossal, man-made space, some spanning over 10,000 square meters, with ceilings soaring as high as a 5-story building. Inside, you do not find rough, haphazard digging. You find architecture. Massive support pillars are left standing at regular intervals, holding up the vast ceiling. There are straight staircases descending to lower levels, intricate bridges, and perfectly carved pools. Most haunting of all, every single surface, from the walls to the soaring ceilings, is covered in a uniform pattern of parallel chisel marks, a rhythmic, decorative texture applied with obsessive consistency across millions of square feet of rock. This was not just excavation, it was artistry on an industrial scale. And according to carbon dating and geological analysis, this titanic project was completed over 2,000 years ago, during a period that aligns with the Qin or Han dynasties. Yet, in all the voluminous historical records from those eras, there is not a single mention of these caves. No imperial decree, no local chronicle, no poet's ode. Their construction is a historical black hole. This silence fuels the central mystery. Why were they built? The sheer volume of removed stone, estimated at nearly 1 million cubic meters, points first to a practical function, a quarry. Perhaps the fine, grey sandstone was prized for building a nearby city or palace, but this theory quickly unravels. If this was a quarry, why invest unimaginable effort to create beautiful, pillared halls with decorative chisel marks? Quarries are utilitarian. They extract stone efficiently, leaving behind ragged pits, not pristine, cathedral-like spaces. The artistic effort makes no economic sense for a simple mine. Could it have been a secret imperial project, a hidden fortress or storage complex for a ruler? The location is not particularly strategic, and no artifacts of occupation, no pottery, tools, or inscriptions were ever found inside. The caves were swept utterly clean. Another compelling idea is a ceremonial purpose, a subterranean temple complex for rituals unknown. The scale and symmetry could support this, yet the complete lack of religious iconography or altars is a puzzling absence. Some have suggested military storage for grain or arms, but again, the decorative finishes argue against pure utility. The purpose is inextricably linked to an even deeper engineering puzzle. How did they do it without collapsing the entire structure? The caves are interconnected, with walls between chambers sometimes less than a meter thick. To carve these vast spaces without modern surveying tools, without bringing down the ceiling of the adjacent cave, required an astonishingly precise master plan. The ancient engineers had to visualize the entire three-dimensional network in advance, calculating the placement of each pillar to bear the weight of the mountain above. Even more baffling is the logistics. Where did all the stone go? 1 million cubic meters of rock is enough to build a small mountain. Transporting that amount away by cart and barge would have left massive spoil heaps, worn roads, and records of such a disruptive project. Yet no trace of the removed stone has ever been identified in the local landscape. It simply vanished. The Longyu Caves stand as a paradox, a project of immense ambition and refined skill that left no fingerprint on history. They are a void that once held a mountain of stone, and a silence that once echoed with the sound of 10,000 chisels. What unified purpose could have been so powerful, so secret, or so sacred, that it demanded this hidden world be carved from the earth and then erased from all memory? The Longyu Caves are a monument to a forgotten purpose, a secret sealed in stone. But another mystery, written not in rock but in the faces of living people, has sparked a legend that crosses continents. In a remote village in Gansu province, a place called Liqian, you might find residents with light hair, green or blue eyes, and features that seem strikingly out of place in northwest China. For decades, these unusual traits fueled one of history's most romantic and controversial theories, that these people are the descendants of a lost Roman legion. The story begins in the deserts of the Middle East in 53 BC. At the Battle of Carrhae, a Roman army led by the general Marcus Licinius Crassus was annihilated by the Parthian Empire. Ancient Roman historians like Pliny the Elder recorded that survivors from this battle were taken captive and marched eastward. From there, the theory takes a leap across space and time. It proposes that some of these Roman prisoners, perhaps employed as frontier mercenaries, eventually found themselves fighting for the Xiongnu Confederation against Han Dynasty forces at the Battle of Zhizhai in 36 BC. Chinese chronicles from that battle describe the use of a strange fish-scale formation by the enemy, which some have interpreted as the Roman testudo or tortoise formation, where soldiers interlock their shields. After their defeat, the theory suggests these foreign soldiers were captured by the Han, given land, and settled in the frontier region that would become Lycian, a name some scholars have fancifully linked to legion. The physical evidence presented is tantalizingly personal, the very appearance of some villagers, along with local folklore and customs that seem distinct from their neighbors. In the early 2000s, this legend gained global attention, prompting DNA studies on the villagers. The results, however, did not deliver a clear victory for the Roman theory. While some tests showed a proportion of Caucasian genetic markers, they pointed not to Southern European origins, but to ancestry from Central or West Asia. This genetic data supports a far more plausible, if less cinematic, historical explanation. For centuries, the Silk Road was a highway of peoples. The region of Gansu was historically home to, and a crossroads for various Indo-European groups like the Yuezhi and the Wusun, who had light hair and eyes. Later, influences from Turkic and other Central Asian populations would have added to this genetic tapestry. The unusual features in Lycian are far more likely a legacy of this ancient, local blending than a 2,000-year-old detour from Italy. So why does the Roman story persist with such power? It speaks to our deep desire for interconnected histories, for epic odysseys that tie the classical worlds of East and West together in a personal, human way. It transforms a quiet Chinese village into a living relic of the Roman Republic. Scholars have thoroughly dismantled the core evidence. The fish scale formation was a common Chinese military term for tight infantry ranks, not a unique Roman tactic. There is no archaeological evidence, no Roman coins, armor, or inscriptions found at the site. Yet the legend endures because it is a beautiful story, a ghost of a possibility that the tides of war could carry a fragment of one great empire to the edge of another, leaving its mark in the genes of a distant valley. The true mystery of Lycian, then, may not be about Roman soldiers, but about how we shape history. It shows how a kernel of observable truth, mixed with a compelling narrative, can create a legend that outlasts the facts, reminding us that sometimes the most persistent history is the story we wish were true. High on the arid, wind-scoured slopes of Mount Baigong in Qinghai Province, a collection of rust-colored tubes emerges from the stone. These are the Baigong pipes, and they weave a mystery that blurs the line between a geological oddity and an archaeological enigma. The setting itself feels otherworldly, near a natural, pyramid-shaped mountain formation that overlooks the stark beauty of the Kadam Basin. Here, explorers found not artifacts but conduits, iron pipes of various diameters, some as thin as a toothpick, others wider than a person's arm. They are not lying on the surface, they are embedded deep within solid rock, a hard, sedimentary stone, and they run in seemingly organized lines. Some reports describe them leading from the mountain directly toward the brackish waters of nearby Tosan Lake, a saltwater lake with no visible outlet. The immediate, arresting question is how iron pipes, a signature of industry, came to be fused into ancient bedrock. Initial excitement led to samples being sent for testing. The results were a shock to some, with one analysis suggesting an age of around 150,000 years. This dating, if accurate, would place the pipes in a time when Homo sapiens were just beginning their global journey, long before any known civilization capable of such metallurgy. The mystery seemed to vault from curious to revolutionary. The most grounded and widely accepted explanation offered by geologists, however, is both elegant and natural. It points to a process known as pipe rock formation. The theory suggests that these are not manufactured pipes at all, but the fossilized remains of ancient tree roots. Millions of years ago, this arid landscape could have been a lush forest. When trees died, their root systems decayed, leaving hollow tubes in the sediment. Over eons, mineral-rich groundwater, particularly water high in iron oxide, percolated through these hollows. The iron precipitated out, coating the insides of the tubes and eventually filling them completely, creating solid, iron-rich casts of the long-vanished roots. Subsequent geological uplift and erosion then exposed these iron casts, which now look like pipes drilled into the mountain. This process is documented in other parts of the world, creating structures that appear eerily manufactured. Yet, the setting and presentation of the Beigong pipes fuel more speculative fires. Their alignment toward the lake, the variation in diameters, and their location near that pyramidal mountain feel too purposeful for some. This has spawned theories of a lost high-technology civilization or even extraterrestrial visitors who left behind plumbing for some unknown purpose. The pipes sit precisely at a crossroads, a junction between a rational, geological narrative and the human hunger for a more extraordinary past. They challenge our perception in a fundamental way. When we look at a strangely straight line in nature, our minds instinctively see design. The Beigong pipes force us to confront that instinct, to ask where the line truly lies between a magnificent natural accident and a forgotten artifact of intelligence. Do we see the ghost of a forest perfectly preserved in iron, or the rusting skeleton of a machine we no longer understand? The silent iron of Beigong poses a question of natural artistry, but the bronze masters of antiquity pursued a perfection that was deliberately supernatural. We return now to the world of sacred metal, to a mystery not of origins but of pinnacles lost. Ancient texts whisper of techniques so advanced they became legend, embodied in two potent symbols, the Liu Ding and the Ju Sai. These were not merely sets of ritual vessels. The 6 tripods and the 9 cauldrons represented the very mandate to rule, cast from bronze that was believed to channel the will of heaven itself. Their creation was the highest achievement of the metallurgist's art, a fusion of technology and theology. And with the collapse of the dynasties that commissioned them, the precise methods for making such objects vanished into history. The terms Liu Ding and Ju Sai thus mark a frontier in our understanding. We have the stunning bronzes that survived, but we have lost the recipes, the secret knowledge that transformed ore into oracle. What were these lost techniques? The clues point in several breathtaking directions. First, the alloy itself. Standard Shang and Ju bronze is a mix of copper and tin, sometimes with lead. But later texts suggest the master casters of the legendary vessels possessed secret formulas, perhaps incorporating rare meteoric iron for a star-born sheen, or precise ratios of other metals to achieve a specific color, a deeper resonance, or a resistance to corrosion that made their work seem eternally new. A second possibility involves scale and precision. Casting a massive ceremonial cauldron weighing hundreds or even thousands of pounds, with walls of even thickness and intricate surface detail, is a nightmare of physics. The lost technique might have been a revolutionary method for managing heat distribution during the pour, or a unique mold-making process that prevented catastrophic cracks in these monumental pieces. The most tantalizing theories, however, involve sensory magic. Some histories speak of bronzes that emitted a perfect, clear tone when struck, a note used in rituals to communicate with the ancestral spirits. The secret could have been a method of tuning the metal as it cooled, or an internal structure that created a specific acoustic property. Others allude to visual effects, a way of treating the surface so it reflected light in a particular, awe-inspiring manner under torchlight in a dim temple, making the sacred symbols seem to dance with inner fire. This is where the mystery becomes tangible. We have bronzes in museums today that may still hold these secrets in their molecular structure. Modern scientists use tools like X-ray fluorescence and neutron activation analysis to dissect the elemental makeup of ancient artifacts. In doing so, they sometimes find anomalies, unexpected traces of arsenic, cobalt, or nickel. Are these the accidental impurities of local ore, or the faint, chemical fingerprints of a lost recipe, a deliberate addition by a master who knew that a pinch of a certain mineral would give the metal a voice or a soul? The tragedy is that we can detect the ingredients, but we have lost the instructions. We know the cake contains flour, eggs, and a strange spice, but we do not know the proportions, the mixing order, or the baking temperature. The loss of Liu Ding and Zhu Sai casting is more than a technical gap. It represents the severing of a chain of esoteric knowledge, passed from master to apprentice within closed workshops, knowledge that died with the last custodian when war or conquest scattered the artisans. These techniques elevated bronze from a craft of immense skill to a sacred art, a form of alchemy where the transformation of earth into metal mirrored the transformation of a king's authority into divine right. So when you stand before a majestic ding in a museum case, you are not just looking at an ancient container. You are looking at a locked vault. Its green patina hides the answer to a question we are only now learning how to ask with our machines. What song did it sing? What light did it catch? What whispered promise between heaven and earth was sealed within its alloy when it flowed, glowing and liquid from the crucible of a forgotten genius? The silent artistry of lost bronze recipes gives way to a modern excavation that shook the foundations of Chinese archaeology. For over a millennium, the final resting place of Cao Cao, the brilliant, ruthless strategist and de facto founder of the Wei state immortalized in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, was one of history's great ghost stories. Legends spoke of 72 decoy tombs built to thwart grave robbers, a final cunning stratagem from a man known as a master of deception. Countless fake discoveries over the centuries only deepened the mystery, turning the search into a scholarly Grail quest. Then, in December of 2009, Chinese archaeologists made a stunning announcement. They believed they had found the real tomb in Zhejiaoxu village near Anyang in Henan province. The evidence presented was compelling. Within the looted two-chamber tomb, they recovered stone tablets bearing the inscription, "Weapons of the King of Wei," a title Cao Cao held. They found a male skeleton, estimated to be around 60 years old at death, matching Cao Cao's known age. Perhaps most tellingly, the tomb itself was relatively modest for a figure of his immense power, lacking the sprawling grandeur of an imperial mausoleum. This aligned perfectly with historical accounts of Cao Cao's famed frugality and his own edicts requesting a simple burial without precious jewels or elaborate ceremony. It seemed the puzzle was solved, the ghost laid to rest with scientific certainty, but almost immediately a storm of controversy erupted. Prominent scholars, both within China and internationally, voiced profound skepticism. They pointed to troubling inconsistencies. The inscribed stone tablets, the cornerstone of the identification, were not found in their original context by archaeologists, but were allegedly recovered from local farmers who had looted the site years earlier. This raised serious questions about their provenance. Could they have been planted? Furthermore, some experts argued the calligraphy style on the tablets did not perfectly match the standard script of the late Han and Wei periods. Other artifacts, like a painting claimed to depict Cao Cao's likeness, were criticized as crude and unconvincing. The modest scale of the tomb, initially seen as evidence, was also turned against the claim. Skeptics asked if this was truly the tomb of the King of Wei. Why was it not more strategically located within his established capital area? Why were the burial goods that remained, even accounting for looting, so sparse? The debate grew heated, spilling from academic journals into the public sphere. It became a modern detective story, a clash of carbon dating, art historical analysis, and fierce national pride. The Chinese government's rapid declaration of the site as a major protected cultural relic only fueled further suspicion among critics, who saw it as a rush to judgment for tourism and prestige. Here lies the core of this contemporary mystery. It is not merely about bones and stones, but about the very process of verifying history. The Cao Cao tomb controversy exposes how archaeology in the 21st century is never a purely scientific endeavor. It is woven with politics, economics, and the powerful human desire to touch a legend. The evidence sits in a tense equilibrium, convincing to some, deeply flawed to others. This means the warlord's final victory may be his enduring elusiveness. Even when we think we have found him, we are left battling over the authenticity of the discovery itself, caught between the desire for a definitive answer and the shadowy doubt that perhaps after all these centuries, Cao is still one step ahead. Deep within the tomb of King Zhao Mo, amidst the jade suits and ritual bronzes, a collection of objects whispered of a world far wider than the Central Plains. These were not Chinese artifacts, they were foreign guests interred with a southern king, and their presence rewrites our map of the ancient world. Archaeologists discovered Persian-style silver boxes, intricately worked with designs of Western Asiatic origin. They found beads crafted from materials native to the jungles of Southeast Asia or the shores of India. And most astonishing of all, they uncovered a set of official seals, but not carved from jade or bronze. They were made from African elephant ivory, each of these items, resting in a 2nd century BC tomb in modern Guangzhou, represents a separate thread in a web of trade that stretched thousands of miles, a web that existed before the Silk Road was a formalized route under the Han Dynasty. The mystery here is not their existence, but their journey. How did a Persian silver box, likely from the realm of the Parthian Empire, find its way to the court of Nanyu? Who carried delicate glass beads across the Bay of Bengal and up the river systems of southern China? And most perplexing, who transported raw African ivory, or perhaps the finished seals themselves, from the savannas across the Indian Ocean and into the hands of a king on the South China Sea? These objects did not travel in a single epic caravan. They moved through a chain of intermediaries, a relay race of commerce across what historians now call the Maritime Silk Road. Arab and Indian traders likely sailed the monsoon winds between the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the ports of India. From there, seafaring merchants from Southeast Asia would have carried the goods further east through the Strait of Malacca and into the South China Sea, where the ships of Nanyu, a kingdom with a formidable navy, could meet them. The Nanyu Kingdom was not a passive endpoint. It was a vibrant, cosmopolitan hub that actively sought these connections. Its location at the Pearl River Delta made it a natural gateway. The kingdom's wealth, built on local resources like pearls and tropical goods, gave it the purchasing power to acquire exotic luxuries. The ivory seals are the ultimate symbol of this interconnectedness. Ivory was a precious commodity, but to have it carved into the very instruments of royal authority, the stamps that validated official documents, is a profound statement. It meant that foreign material was not just a curiosity, it was integrated into the machinery of the state. King Zhao Mo was literally signing his decrees with the tusk of an African elephant. This reveals a level of global awareness that we are only beginning to appreciate. It suggests that by the 2nd century BCE, a king in southern China could access a network that linked his palace to workshops in Persia, bead makers in India, and elephant herds in Africa, all through the hands of countless anonymous merchants and sailors. The tomb becomes a silent archive of this lost globalization. We know the objects arrived, but the stories of the ships that carried them, the markets where they were bartered, and the faces of the traders who brokered these deals are lost to the sea and the jungle. These artifacts force us to replace the image of isolated ancient civilizations with a much messier, more exciting reality of a world already in conversation. Its voices carried on the waves long before the great empires of the West ever dreamed of Cathay. Music was not entertainment in ancient China, it was a force of cosmic order. Among the revered 6 classics that formed the core of Confucian education, one text was dedicated entirely to this profound power, the Yu Jing, the classic of music. It stood alongside the classic of poetry, the classic of history, and the others, a pillar of cultivated thought. And then it was silenced. While the infamous burning of books by Qin Shi Huang is often cited, the fate of the Yu Jing is a more specific, haunting tragedy. It did not simply perish in a single blaze, it faded from the world, leaving behind only echoes in other texts that reference its once great authority. From these fragments, we can piece together a shadow of its scope. It was not a simple songbook. It was a comprehensive treatise that wove together the physical science of sound, the spiritual practice of ritual, and the practical art of statecraft. It detailed how specific musical modes and instruments could harmonize the human heart, how proper ritual music could align society, and how discordant sounds could portend the collapse of a dynasty. Music, in this philosophy, was a measurable vibration that connected the inner self to the outer universe and the court to the heavens. Its loss is not merely the loss of an ancient manuscript. It is the loss of an entire language for understanding reality. Think of it as losing the operator's manual for a fundamental human technology. We have the instruments, we have descriptions of ceremonies, but we have lost the deep theoretical framework that explained why a particular scale could calm a restless crowd, or why a specific arrangement of bells and chimes during a sacrifice was believed to ensure a good harvest. This was a science where acoustics met ethics, where mathematics met morality. The silence left behind is deafening. Did any part of it survive? Scholars scour later texts like the record of rites and the writings of philosophers, finding passages that may quote or paraphrase the classic of music. It is possible its core ideas were absorbed, its philosophy disseminated so widely that the original text became redundant, and its physical copies were lost to war, decay, or simple neglect. But the more chilling possibility is that it was targeted, that its comprehensive vision of music as a tool for social harmony was seen as a threat by rulers who preferred more direct means of control, leading to its systematic suppression. Without the original, we are left guessing at the nuances. We know the ancient Chinese perfected magnificent bronze bells that could produce two distinct pitches, a triumph of acoustic engineering. But what spiritual or political principles dictated their exact tuning? We have poems that were meant to be sung. What melodies, governed by what rules from the classic of music, carried their meaning? This vanished text leaves a ghost at the heart of Chinese civilization. It represents a silent column in the architecture of ancient thought, a reminder that some of history's most profound symphonies of ideas have been played and then lost, leaving us to strain our ears for melodies we can only imagine. The silent symphony of a lost musical classic gives way to a chorus of faces, preserved in the dry air of a desert, that tell a different story entirely. In the vast, arid Tarim basin of Xinjiang, the earth has yielded up its inhabitants not as bones but as people. Hundreds of naturally mummified bodies, dating from as early as 1800 BC to 200 CE, lie in a state of preservation so intimate it feels like a confrontation. You can see the individual stitches in their clothing, the intricate patterns of their felted boots, and the very expressions on their faces, and these faces are startling. Many possess distinctly Caucasoid features, with high-bridged noses, deep-set eyes, and hair that ranges from light brown and red to blonde. They are dressed not in silk or hemp, but in brightly colored woolen textiles, woven in twill patterns of plaid and tartan, in styles that feel eerily reminiscent of ancient Celtic or Germanic cultures, thousands of miles to the west. Buried with them are round, felted hats that would not look out of place on the Eurasian steppe. These are not the ancestors one might expect to find in what is today Western China. Their very presence in the Tarim Basin, a region historically seen as a remote frontier, ignites a mystery that rewrites the prehistoric map of Asia. Who were they and where did they come from? The most compelling answer points to the Tocharians, an Indo-European people who spoke a now extinct language in the same family as Celtic, Latin, and Greek. Linguistic evidence from later manuscripts found in the region confirms an Indo-European presence. These mummies may be the earliest physical manifestation of that culture, migrants who traveled eastward from the steppes, perhaps following rivers into the oasis towns of the Taklamakan Desert. Their material world, preserved in exquisite detail, reveals a sophisticated and unique way of life. Some of the mummies bear beautiful, intricate tattoos on their hands and arms, swirling designs that echo artistic motifs found in Siberia. They used sophisticated chariots with spoked wheels, a technology that originated in the West. Perhaps most charmingly, archaeologists discovered lumps of a yellowish substance on the necks and chests of some mummies. Analysis revealed it to be the world's oldest known cheese, a clever, portable source of protein for their journeys. This was not a transient band of lost travelers. They established settled communities, weaving their own distinct textiles, practicing agriculture and herding, and developing a culture that thrived for nearly 2,000 years in this harsh landscape. The profound implication of these mummies is a challenge to the old narrative of an isolated Chinese civilization developing in splendid solitude along the Yellow River. Instead, the Tarim Basin emerges as a prehistoric crossroads, a melting pot where East and West met millennia before the formal Silk Road. These people with European features were not invaders at the gates, they were neighbors in the oasis, weaving a different thread into the fabric of the region's history. Their existence forces us to see ancient Xinjiang not as an empty periphery, but as a vibrant cosmopolitan zone where ideas, technologies, and genes flowed freely. The mystery of their ultimate fate is as poignant as their preservation. They did not disappear through catastrophe, but likely through gradual assimilation. As Han Chinese influence expanded westward and Turkic peoples moved in from the north, the distinct Tocharian culture and language slowly faded, absorbed into the new demographic tides. Their bodies, however, refused to vanish. Dried by the salty sand and the relentless desert air, they waited, wearing their plaid wool and their enigmatic smiles, to deliver a message from a forgotten world, a world that was always connected. The ghost of Jianwen did not vanish with the palace smoke. It moved into the mind of his uncle, the new Yongle emperor, and began to build. For the rest of his reign, Yongle was a man haunted by a living absence. His frantic efforts to find his nephew or to confirm his death became a sprawling, secretive campaign that stretched across the empire and beyond its shores. Eunuchs were dispatched on covert missions to temples and remote provinces, following whispers of a monk with imperial bearing. But the most audacious search operation may have sailed under the banner of tribute and exploration. The legendary treasure fleets of Admiral Zheng He, those colossal armadas that projected Ming power from Southeast Asia to Africa, carried with them a persistent, tantalizing rumor. Some historians argue that alongside their diplomatic and commercial goals, these voyages held a clandestine secondary objective: to scour the ports and kingdoms of the Indian Ocean for any trace of the fugitive emperor. Could Jianwen have escaped by sea, finding sanctuary in a foreign court? The theory is compelling, for it gives a deeply personal, almost desperate motive to those magnificent, expensive journeys. Every foreign envoy received, every strange land mapped, was also a potential lead in the emperor's most personal investigation. Meanwhile, across China, a folklore of survival took root, growing more detailed with each passing decade. Legends speak of Jianwen, his head shaved, his robes exchanged for simple hemp, wandering the sacred mountains and ancient monasteries. He is said to have left a trail of cryptic poems carved into temple walls or whispered to abbots, verses filled with sorrow and veiled references to his lost throne. At Jinting Temple on Sichuan's Mount Amei, a verse attributed to him reads, "I drifted to Sichuan as a wandering monk, facing walls in meditation amid clouds and mist." Another, at White Dragon Temple in Yunnan, reportedly says, "I have traveled over 40 years through wind and dust, my black beard has turned white." These poetic fragments are unverifiable, likely the beautiful inventions of later generations, but they served a powerful purpose. They gave shape to the ghost, transforming a political mystery into a human story of loss and endurance that resonated with the common people. The emperor became a folk hero, a symbol of Buddhist renunciation who chose a life of peace over the bloody game of power. This pervasive legend exacted a profound psychological toll on Yongle. His usurpation was technically successful, but it lacked the unassailable legitimacy that comes from an undisputed succession. every report of a sighting, every popular ballad about the wandering monk emperor was a subtle erosion of his authority. In response, Yongle embarked on a breathtaking campaign of legacy building, an attempt to bury his nephew's ghost under an avalanche of stone, ink, and maritime glory. He moved the capital from Nanjing, the city of the fire and the disappearance, to the north, building the magnificent Forbidden City in Beijing as a new, unchallengeable seat of power from scratch. He commissioned the gargantuan Yongle Encyclopedia, an effort to compile all known writing, perhaps to control the narrative of history itself, and he greenlit Zheng He's voyages which, whether they searched for Jianwen or not, proclaimed to the world the irresistible might and sophistication of his reign. Each monumental act can be seen as a reaction to that original, unresolved crime. He was not just building an empire, he was constructing a tomb for a rumor. So the mystery of Jianwen's fate transcends the simple question of what happened to one man. It becomes the story of the ghost that shaped a dynasty. It influenced foreign policy, possibly redirecting the course of naval exploration. It fueled domestic folklore, creating a counter-narrative to official history. And it arguably drove the most ambitious construction projects of the Ming, leaving a physical legacy we can still walk through today. The Forbidden City stands as much a monument to Yongle's power as it is a fortress against his own insecurity. In the end, Jianwen, whether he died in the fire or lived to an old age in obscurity, achieved a form of victory. He became an idea that his uncle, for all his armies and fleets and palaces, could never capture or kill, a silent question that echoed through the golden age he created. From the psychological legacy of a vanished emperor to the physical echoes of forgotten peoples, this journey through 30 mysteries reveals a landscape of profound questions. We have stood before a sealed mountain of mercury, navigated a sunken city preserved in deep water, and traced the silent paths of ancient astronomers in the desert. We have listened for the lost music of a civilization and stared into the preserved faces of travelers from another world. Each mystery is a locked door, and behind it lies not just an answer but a new way of seeing the past. These puzzles are far more than historical curiosities. They are the very frontiers of our understanding. They remind us with startling clarity how much of the human story is still written in shadows, waiting for a sliver of light. Look at the common threads woven through all 30 enigmas. The overwhelming human desire for a legacy, whether cast in bronze, carved into cliff faces, or hidden beneath a mountain. The heartbreaking fragility of knowledge, how entire libraries, technologies, and languages can vanish in the smoke of war or the quiet erosion of time. And finally, the endless human capacity for wonder, that driving force that makes us dig the well, map the stars, and dare to ask what lies behind the sealed door. This is the true gift of these mysteries. They do not let history become a closed book. They force it to remain an open conversation, a living puzzle that invites us to participate. So keep questioning, keep exploring, look at the world around you, and remember that every artifact, every faded document, every strange formation in the landscape is a potential piece of a story much larger than ourselves. Which of these 30 mysteries left you most captivated? Was it the silent army guarding an unopened tomb, the sunken city sleeping in its lake, or the lost fleet whose records were burned? Let us know in the comments below. If you crave more journeys into the unknown, subscribe for deep dives into the greatest enigmas our world has to offer. And never forget, history is not a list of dates and dead kings. It is the greatest mystery story ever told, and we are all its detectives.